Hello, this is the second in a series of videos I'm making on the Baha'i view of human rights. It comes from a very ancient, now very ancient paper which I first presented at an international symposium on the conception of human rights, held under the aegis of the International Sociological Association in Dubrovnik in 1985. I've lightly edited it for publication. It's recently been published in a collection of essays put together by Mikhail and Sergeev under the title of Religion and Science in the Globalized World. I'll give the reference to the book below. Please note that I'm not going to give the references in the video. If you want to look at the references and the sources I'm using, please look at the essay in Mikhail Sergeev's book. I will also apologize in advance if you hear any background street noises, and I was deliberately making this video on a Sunday in the hope that Bangkok traffic would be less intrusive than it normally is, but I seem to be out of luck today. For ease of recording, I've divided the paper up into 7 different sections as listed here, and we're so now onto the second of those sections. Under the heading of economic freedoms, I've identified what I see as 3 key ideas from the Baha'i writings. One is freedom from slavery and economic want, secondly work and inequality, and thirdly on education and development. The Baha'i leaders taught that human beings should free themselves from attachment to the material world. The world was but a show, vain and empty, a mere nothing, bearing the semblance of reality. Set not your affections upon it, wrote Baha'u'llah. Nevertheless, physical survival depends upon the successful use of the world's resources. God does not create human beings that they should starve, neither does he demand that they should follow a life of asceticism and self-mortification. There's nothing inherently evil about wealth. It is material attachment and the misuse of wealth that is to be morally condemned. So first, freedom from slavery and economic want. The Baha'i writings prohibit both slavery and the slave trade, for to no human being is given the right to lord himself over another. Basic freedom requires more than this, however. As Abdu'l-Baha observed, the struggle for physical survival was the fountainhead of all calamities. Lack of basic material means was a form of enslavement which reduced human beings to ferocious animals, degrading and demoralizing them. Like chattel slavery, economic slavery had to be abolished. At a basic level, Baha'u'llah reaffirmed the Islamic principle of the zakat, a tax levy on behalf of the poor, and made care of the destitute a communal responsibility. Beyond this, Abdu'l-Baha insisted on the necessity for governments to legislate against extremes of both wealth and poverty. For Abdu'l-Baha, absolute equality was a chimera, but no one had the right to amass colossal fortunes when millions suffered the miseries of poverty. Such a state of affairs was a sign of the existence of tyranny. All human beings had the right to the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, and rest from labor. All should have some share of comfort and well-being. More specifically, in the industrial context, workers should have legally established rights to an adequate wage and pension, as well as to a share in the profits of the company they work for. Cases of industrial disputes needed to be settled by independent judicial or government arbitration. As strikes were socially and economically destructive, governments had a responsibility to intervene. In the agricultural context, each local community needed to establish a general storehouse out of which those in need might be supported. As in more complex local economies, the main funding for such a storehouse should be provided by a graduated income tax. The government edict was not the only means by which the lot of the poor should be improved. Whilst the Baha'i leaders regarded begging and giving to beggars as reprehensible, they praised the voluntary sharing of wealth as one of the most meritorious of deeds. Indeed, for the rich to ignore the midnight sighing of the poor was a denial of their responsibilities before God. Such heedlessness on their part surely led them to the path of destruction. Wealth easily became a mighty barrier between the individual and God, leading to the atrophy of spiritual qualities. Thus, Baha'u'llah wrote, "The rich, but for few, shall in no wise attain the court of his, that is God's, presence, nor enter the city of content and resignation." Again, human advancement required social reciprocity and cooperation. For human beings, not to be concerned with the welfare and interests of others was an abnegation of their responsibilities and status as human beings. It was impossible to win the good pleasure of God as long as exorbitant wealth and dire poverty continued to coexist. Moreover, as all humankind constituted one family, and the world's wealth was provided so that all human beings might live in perfect happiness and peace, gross global inequalities in wealth constituted a manifest injustice, subject presumably to the same strictures regarding the spiritual consequences of economic injustice within a society. The Baha'i teachings emphasized the necessity for fundamental economic restructuring so as to ensure a more equitable distribution of wealth, both in the world as a whole and within individual societies. Such equity does not entail economic equality, however. Absolute equality was not regarded as an obtainable reality. Even with a similar allocation of resources, economic differences would readily develop. Class differences were to be recognized as a permanent reality of social life, though a principle such as industrial profit sharing, which I mentioned previously, would undoubtedly modify the nature of class divisions. Social stability and cohesion necessitated that all people, particularly the rich, develop a stronger sense of social responsibility, justice and cooperation. But the bases of inequality were also legitimated, with the rights of both private property and familial inheritance clearly upheld in the Baha'i writings. Again, whilst government intervention in the economy and progressive taxation against the rich were advocated in the interests of social justice, capital accumulation, profit-making, and the receipt of moderate interest payments were all regarded as allowable activities. Rather than condemning wealth, the Baha'i teachings seek to revalue its production and use, and to extend its advantages to all human beings. In this regard, the nature of work becomes crucial. In his book, the Kitab al-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah had forbidden begging and given work and the earning of one's living the status of religious obligations. Idleness and a life of religious seclusion were also prohibited. More than this, work was to be regarded as a form of worship, especially when performed in the spirit of service to others. Baha'is were instructed to occupy themselves in that which would profit both themselves and others. Again, other people's work was to be respected, and the acquisition of useful skills and knowledge regarded as a source of glory. Finally, let's turn to the ideas of education and development. If equitably shared and used for the service of humanity, rather than only for individual aggrandizement, then wealth was to be positively regarded. From a Baha'i standpoint, such means as increased the collective wealth of the human race were to be applauded and fostered. Both government action and individual enterprise should be directed to such endeavor. The intelligent development of industry, commerce, technology, science, and most particularly agriculture, was to be encouraged. All aspects of the social and economic life of a community were intimately linked together. Education constituted a vital aspect of socioeconomic development. At an individual level, every child, every adult even, had the right to receive a basic education. Everyone should be taught to read and write. All should be given the basic skills they needed for the acquisition of a trade or profession. Both sexes had this right, but in extreme cases of limited resources, educational priority should be given to the girl child in her role as the potential mother and first educator of her own children. Although parents had a particular obligation to ensure that their children were educated, the ultimate responsibility for this lay with the community as a whole. Again, children themselves were obliged to apply themselves diligently to their own education. Whilst every individual was encouraged to use education as a means of self-advancement, it was not necessary for all children to receive more than a basic education. So, thank you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement, without which I wouldn't be able to make these videos. You're very welcome to support my channel if you should so wish. Please do like, comment and share the videos, it really does help. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give a Patreon link below if you want to provide practical support. Next week we'll talk about what I've labelled political freedoms. Have a good day.